The sound of waves crashing against a yacht in the middle of the night. The desperate cries for help that would never be heard. And a Hollywood legend floating face down in the dark, cold waters of the Pacific Ocean. November 29, 1981, started as just another glamorous weekend for one of America's most beloved actresses. But it would end in a mystery that has haunted Hollywood for over 4 decades. What really happened that night on the yacht named Splendour? Why did a woman who was terrified of water end up drowning in it? And why, after all these years, are the people who were there still changing their stories? Before her tragic death, Robert Wagner's wife made statements and confessions that would send shockwaves through an investigation that refuses to die. This is the story that Hollywood tried to bury, but the truth has a way of rising to the surface, just like Natalie Wood's body did that cold November morning. Natalie Wood wasn't just another actress. She was Hollywood royalty, a child star who successfully transitioned into one of the most acclaimed adult actresses of her generation. From the moment she appeared on screen as a little girl in Miracle on 34th Street, audiences were captivated by those enormous dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets beyond her years. By the time she was a teenager, she had already received an Academy Award nomination for Rebel Without a Cause, working alongside James Dean in what would become one of cinema's most iconic films. But it was her roles in West Side Story, Splendor in the Grass, and Gypsy that cemented her status as one of the greatest actresses of her time. She could do it all: drama, musicals, romance. Directors loved her. Audiences adored her. And Hollywood crowned her as one of its brightest stars. But behind the glamorous red carpets and the magazine covers, Natalie Wood carried a darkness that few people understood. She had a phobia, an absolutely paralyzing fear that she had carried since childhood. It was a fear of dark water, of drowning, of the ocean's depths. Those who knew her well would later say that she would never voluntarily go near water at night, that even the thought of it would send shivers down her spine. Her sister Lana would reveal years later that Natalie had confided in her about this terror, describing nightmares where she would drown in dark water. It was a fear so profound that it shaped decisions in her life and career. So when her body was found floating in the Pacific Ocean, wearing only a nightgown and a down jacket, having apparently tried to board a small dinghy in the middle of the night, those who knew her best were immediately skeptical. This wasn't just unusual. It was impossible. Natalie would never have done that. Not willingly. Not alone. Not in the dark. Her relationship with Robert Wagner was the stuff of Hollywood legend. But like so many Hollywood love stories, it was far more complicated than the public ever knew. They first met when Natalie was just 18 years old and Wagner was already an established leading man. The chemistry was instant, electric, and undeniable. They married in 1957, and the media went wild. Here was Hollywood's perfect couple: beautiful, talented, successful, and seemingly madly in love. But the fairy tale didn't last. Their first marriage ended in divorce in 1962, with rumors swirling about infidelity, jealousy, and Wagner's controlling behavior. Natalie went on to marry producer Richard Gregson and had a daughter, Natasha. But the pull between Natalie and Wagner never truly disappeared. They remarried in 1972, and this time, everyone hoped it would work. They had another daughter together, Courtney, and from the outside, everything looked perfect. But those close to them knew better. They knew about the arguments, the jealousy that still simmered beneath the surface, and Wagner's volatile temper when he had been drinking. The weekend of Thanksgiving 1981 was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. Natalie was in the middle of filming Brainstorm with Christopher Walken, a serious dramatic actor who had recently won an Academy Award for The Deer Hunter. The production had been challenging, and Natalie wanted a break. Wagner suggested they take their yacht, the Splendour, to Catalina Island for the weekend. Christopher Walken was invited to join them, along with the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern. It should have been a pleasant trip: good food, good wine, and good company while floating in the waters off one of Southern California's most beautiful islands. But from the moment they set sail on Friday, November 27th, there was tension in the air. Wagner had been drinking heavily, and those who were there would later report that he seemed on edge, watching Natalie and Walken with an intensity that made everyone uncomfortable. On Saturday, November 28th, the group went ashore to Catalina Island and had dinner at Doug's Harbor Reef restaurant. Witnesses at the restaurant would later tell investigators that all 3 actors appeared to be having a good time, laughing and drinking wine with their meal. But Captain Dennis Davern, who was with them, would later reveal that the joviality was a performance. He could see the tension in Wagner's body language, the way he watched Natalie and Walken interact. Walken and Natalie were discussing their film, their craft, their artistic approaches to acting. It was the kind of deep, intellectual conversation that Wagner couldn't participate in or understand. And it ate at him. By the time they returned to the yacht that evening, Wagner had consumed a considerable amount of alcohol, and his jealousy had reached a boiling point. What happened next has been the subject of intense speculation, investigation, and controversy for over 40 years. The official story, the one that Wagner and Walken initially told authorities, was simple and tragic. Natalie had gone to bed in one of the yacht's cabins. Sometime late that night, she apparently decided to secure the dinghy that was banging against the side of the yacht, disturbing her sleep. According to this version, she slipped while trying to tie it down, hit her head, and fell into the water, drowning before anyone realized she was missing. The problem with this story is that almost nothing about it makes sense. Natalie was terrified of water and had no knowledge of boats or sailing. Why would she alone, in the middle of the night, try to secure a dinghy? And why was she wearing a nightgown, socks, and a heavy down jacket if she had simply gone on deck for a moment? The jacket would have become waterlogged and heavy, pulling her down rather than helping her float. And perhaps most troubling of all, why didn't anyone hear her cries for help? Captain Dennis Davern has become the key witness in this case, and his story has evolved dramatically over the years. In the immediate aftermath of Natalie's death, Davern backed up Wagner's account of events. He told investigators that he had been in his cabin and hadn't heard anything unusual. But 30 years later, in 2011, Davern appeared on national television and made a shocking admission. He had lied. He revealed that he had been pressured to conceal what really happened that night, and his conscience had been eating at him for 3 decades. According to Davern's new testimony, the evening of November 28th had been far from peaceful. After returning from dinner, an argument had erupted between Wagner and Walken about Natalie's career. Wagner accused Walken of trying to convince Natalie to do more films, to spend more time away from her family. The conversation grew heated, and at one point, Wagner smashed a wine bottle on the table in a fit of rage, shouting, "What do you want to do with my wife?" Davern's revised account paints a picture of escalating tension and violence. He claims that after Walken retreated to his cabin, the argument continued between Wagner and Natalie. The captain could hear them fighting, could hear Natalie's voice growing more upset. And then, according to Davern, there was a period of time when he heard nothing at all. When he came out on deck, Natalie was gone, and the dinghy was missing. But here's what haunts Davern the most. Wagner allegedly told him not to immediately turn on the searchlight or call for help. According to the captain, Wagner said they should wait, that Natalie was probably just trying to embarrass him. They waited for what Davern estimates was 10 to 15 minutes before finally turning on the yacht's lights and beginning a search. In cold ocean water, those 15 minutes could mean the difference between life and death. If Davern's account is accurate, Wagner's delay in calling for help directly contributed to Natalie's drowning. Christopher Walken has remained largely silent about the events of that night. Unlike Davern, who eventually came forward with his story, Walken has given only brief, carefully worded statements over the years. In one interview, he simply said, "I don't know what happened. She slipped and fell in the water. I was in bed then. It was a terrible thing." He has never elaborated, never provided additional details, and has consistently declined to discuss the matter further. His silence has led to intense speculation. What does he know? What did he witness? And why has he chosen to remain quiet all these years? In recent investigations, Natalie's sister Lana Wood revealed that Walken did speak with detectives when the case was reopened, but the contents of those conversations have not been made public. Some have suggested that Walken signed a non-disclosure agreement or received legal advice to remain silent. Others believe he genuinely was in his cabin and knows no more than what he's already said. But in a case filled with contradictions and evolving stories, his silence stands out as particularly notable. The original investigation into Natalie's death was remarkably brief and, many would argue, inadequate. The Los Angeles County coroner, Thomas Noguchi, ruled her death an accidental drowning, noting that her blood alcohol content was 0.14% and that she had traces of motion sickness medication and painkillers in her system. The official theory was that the combination of alcohol, medication, and an attempt to secure the dinghy resulted in her accidental fall into the ocean. But even at the time, there were troubling inconsistencies. The autopsy revealed fresh bruises on Natalie's body, on her arms, her legs, and particularly on her right wrist and left ankle. The bruises were described as being consistent with someone who had struggled or been grabbed. Noguchi later stated that these injuries suggested she had tried to climb back aboard the dinghy multiple times before succumbing to hypothermia and drowning. But others looked at those bruises and saw evidence of something more sinister, a physical altercation before she entered the water. The case remained closed for 30 years, officially classified as an accidental drowning. But it never truly went away. Books were written, documentaries were made, and questions continued to be asked. How did Natalie end up in the water? Why didn't Wagner and Davern immediately search for her? And most importantly, what really happened during those hours on the yacht? In 2011, the case was officially reopened after Captain Dennis Davern came forward with his new testimony. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department announced that they had received credible new information that warranted a fresh investigation. The coroner's office amended the death certificate, changing the cause of death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. That single word, undetermined, was significant. It meant that investigators could no longer say with certainty that Natalie's death was an accident. In 2018, Robert Wagner was officially named a person of interest in the investigation. Lieutenant John Corina of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department held a press conference and made a statement that sent shockwaves through Hollywood. As we've investigated the case over the last 6 years, I think he's more of a person of interest now. We know now that he was the last person to be with Natalie before she disappeared. When asked directly whether Wagner is a suspect, Corina was careful with his words but clear in his implication. Detectives wanted to speak with Wagner again about the events of that night. Wagner, through his attorney, declined to be interviewed. His refusal to cooperate with investigators has been interpreted by many as evidence of guilt, though his legal team has argued that at his advanced age, he should not be subjected to repeated questioning about the most traumatic event of his life. New witnesses have come forward over the years, each adding pieces to the puzzle. A couple on a nearby boat told investigators that around 11 p.m. on the night Natalie disappeared, they heard a woman's voice calling out, "Help me, someone please help me." They heard the cries for help for approximately 15 minutes before they stopped. The couple assumed someone would respond, and didn't realize until the next morning that they had likely heard Natalie Wood's final moments. This testimony is particularly damning when considered alongside Captain Davern's claim that Wagner delayed the search. If Wagner had immediately turned on the searchlight and called for help, as any reasonable person would do when their spouse goes missing from a boat, Natalie might have been saved. The fact that people heard her calling for help, that she was conscious and able to cry out, means she was alive and could potentially have been rescued. Instead, she was left in the dark, cold water, calling out to people who either couldn't hear her or chose not to respond. Lana Wood, Natalie's younger sister, has been one of the most vocal advocates for justice in this case. In interviews and in her memoir, Lana has stated unequivocally that she believes Wagner is responsible for her sister's death. "I don't believe it was murder," she told CBS News. "I believe it was a tragic accident that could have been prevented." She has described Wagner's behavior after Natalie's death as suspicious and troubling. According to Lana, Wagner cut off contact with her almost immediately after the funeral, refusing to let her see Natalie's daughters or have any involvement in their lives. He allegedly blacklisted her in Hollywood, making it difficult for her to find work. Most troublingly, Lana claims that when she confronted Wagner years later and asked him directly what happened that night, his response was evasive and defensive. She said his behavior convinced her that he was hiding something, that he knew more than he had ever admitted to authorities. The forensic evidence, when examined closely, raises even more questions. The dinghy that Natalie supposedly tried to board was found about a mile from where the Splendour was anchored. The dinghy's motor was in the off position, and the oars were still stowed. If Natalie had gotten into the dinghy, whether voluntarily or accidentally, why didn't she try to start the motor or use the oars? Even someone unfamiliar with boats would have attempted to call for help or tried to row back to the yacht. Instead, the evidence suggests that she was in the water, not in the dinghy. The heavy down jacket she was wearing, initially thought to be something she grabbed to stay warm on deck, would have absorbed water rapidly, becoming incredibly heavy and pulling her down. Some experts have suggested that the jacket indicates she expected to be outside for more than just a moment, that perhaps she was leaving the yacht entirely, trying to get away from a dangerous situation. The timeline of events has been reconstructed by investigators, and it reveals troubling gaps. According to the official accounts, Natalie was last seen alive around 10:30 p.m. Her body was discovered at approximately 8 a.m. the next morning, floating about a mile from the yacht near Blue Cavern Point. But the Coast Guard wasn't called until after 1:30 a.m., more than 3 hours after Wagner claims he noticed she was missing. In those crucial hours, Natalie was likely still alive, fighting to survive in water that was approximately 60 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, hypothermia can set in within 30 minutes, but a person can potentially survive for several hours if they manage to keep their head above water. The question that haunts this case is, could she have been saved if the search had begun immediately? The answer, according to maritime experts, is almost certainly yes. Wagner's behavior in the years since Natalie's death has done little to dispel suspicions. He remarried in 1990 to actress Jill St. John, a friend of both his and Natalie's. There have been reports and allegations that Wagner and St. John were involved in an affair before Natalie's death, though both have denied this. Wagner wrote a memoir in 2008 called Pieces of My Heart, in which he discussed Natalie's death, but his account has been criticized as vague and self-serving. He wrote that he believes Natalie's death was a tragic accident, that she must have tried to secure the dinghy and fallen into the water. But he provides no explanation for why he didn't immediately call for help, why he delayed the search, or why his story has remained so remarkably consistent despite the contradictions raised by other witnesses. In the book, he expresses grief and loss, but notably, he never directly addresses the accusations that have been leveled against him or the questions that have been raised about his actions that night. The legal situation is complicated. California has no statute of limitations on murder, which means Wagner could theoretically still be charged if sufficient evidence were found. However, proving what happened 40 years ago, with limited physical evidence and witnesses who were all under the influence of alcohol, presents enormous challenges for prosecutors. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office has reviewed the case multiple times and has so far declined to file charges, stating that while there are suspicious circumstances, there is insufficient evidence to prove criminal conduct beyond a reasonable doubt. This has been deeply frustrating for those seeking justice for Natalie, particularly her sister Lana, who has argued that at minimum, Wagner should be charged with negligent homicide for his failure to immediately search for his wife. New forensic analysis of the original autopsy photos has revealed details that were overlooked or downplayed in 1981. A forensic pathologist who reviewed the case in 2012 noted that the pattern and location of bruises on Natalie's body were more consistent with injuries sustained before entering the water, not from attempts to climb back into the dinghy as originally theorized. The bruises on her wrists and arms, in particular, suggested that she may have been grabbed or restrained. There were also scratches on her neck and face that could indicate a struggle. The expert concluded that while drowning was certainly the cause of death, the circumstances under which she entered the water remain highly suspicious and cannot be definitively classified as accidental based on the physical evidence alone. The psychological profile of the relationship between Natalie and Wagner has been examined by experts in domestic violence and relationship dynamics. Several troubling patterns emerge. Wagner was reportedly intensely jealous and controlling, particularly when he had been drinking. Multiple sources have described incidents throughout their marriage where Wagner became angry and possessive when Natalie interacted with other men, even professionally. Natalie had reportedly told friends that she was considering leaving Wagner again, that the marriage wasn't working, and that his jealousy and drinking had become unbearable. If these reports are accurate, it paints a picture of a relationship in crisis, with Wagner feeling increasingly threatened and out of control. Experts in domestic violence point out that the most dangerous time for a victim is often when they are planning to leave or have threatened to leave the relationship. This context makes the events of that November night take on a darker significance. The impact on Natalie's daughters has been profound and lasting. Natasha Gregson Wagner, Natalie's daughter from her marriage to Richard Gregson, was 11 years old when her mother died. For years, she defended Wagner, the man who raised her, and insisted that her mother's death was a tragic accident. But in recent years, Natasha has become more open to questioning the official narrative. She has said in interviews that she wants to know the truth, whatever it is. Courtney Wagner, Natalie and Robert's biological daughter, has remained more loyal to her father and has stayed largely out of the public eye. The sisters have reportedly had conflicts over the case, with Natasha's growing questions creating tension with Courtney's unwavering support of their father. Both women have had to live their lives under the shadow of their mother's mysterious death, never truly knowing what happened that night and whether the man who raised them had any responsibility for losing their mother. The culture of Hollywood silence has been a significant factor in this case. For decades, the entertainment industry protected Wagner, treating him as a victim of tragedy rather than a possible perpetrator. He continued to work steadily after Natalie's death, starring in series like Heart to Heart and making numerous television appearances. The industry's willingness to give him the benefit of the doubt, to accept his version of events without question, reflects a broader pattern of protecting powerful men from accountability. It took 30 years for a witness to feel safe enough to come forward with the truth. How many other people at parties, on film sets, or in Hollywood social circles heard things or saw things that they never reported because they didn't want to cross a powerful actor or get involved in a messy situation? The code of silence in Hollywood has been broken in recent years with the Me Too movement and other revelations, but for decades, it protected potential wrongdoers and left victims without justice. The anniversary of Natalie's death, November 29th, has become a day of remembrance and renewed calls for justice. Each year, fans gather to remember her life and career, laying flowers at her grave and posting tributes online. But increasingly, these commemorations also include demands for answers and accountability. True crime enthusiasts have dissected every aspect of the case, creating detailed timelines, analyzing every statement, and proposing theories about what really happened. Some believe it was murder, that Wagner killed Natalie in a fit of jealous rage. Others think it was manslaughter, that an argument got physical, perhaps she was pushed or fell, and Wagner failed to help her. Still others maintain it could have been an accident, but one made fatal by Wagner's negligent delay in calling for help. What almost no one believes anymore is the original story, that Natalie Wood, a woman terrified of water, voluntarily went out on deck alone in the middle of the night to tie down a dinghy. The marina where the Splendour was docked is now a tourist attraction of sorts, with true crime enthusiasts occasionally visiting to see where the yacht departed from on its final voyage. The yacht itself has changed hands multiple times and has been renamed. Captain Dennis Davern, now in his 70s, lives quietly and has said he regrets not telling the truth from the beginning. He carries the guilt of knowing that his initial lies helped create a false narrative that allowed the real circumstances of Natalie's death to be covered up for decades. He has stated that he hopes his eventual testimony will lead to some form of justice, though he's pessimistic that Wagner will ever face criminal charges. Davern has described his decision to come forward as a moral imperative, something he had to do to be able to live with himself, even though it made him a controversial figure and subjected him to intense scrutiny and skepticism. The question of why Wagner has refused to speak with investigators in recent years is perhaps one of the most damning aspects of the case. If he truly has nothing to hide, if the events of that night unfolded exactly as he described in his memoir, why wouldn't he cooperate with the investigation? His attorneys have stated that he has already told his story multiple times and sees no reason to subject himself to further questioning. But this stance strikes many as suspicious. An innocent person, particularly one whose wife died under mysterious circumstances, would typically want to do everything possible to help solve the case and provide closure. Wagner's silence, his refusal to answer questions or provide additional details, suggests to many that he is afraid of what might come out if he is questioned thoroughly and aggressively by skilled investigators who no longer simply accept his version of events. The advancement in forensic technology has offered new possibilities for understanding what happened. Modern techniques that weren't available in 1981 could potentially reveal new information if physical evidence were re-examined. However, much of the original physical evidence has been lost, destroyed, or degraded over time. The original crime scene, the yacht, has been altered and sold. Natalie's clothing and the items found with her body are preserved, but after 40 years, the ability to extract new information from these items is limited. What remains is testimony. The statements of those who were there, the accounts of witnesses who heard or saw things that night, and the inconsistencies between what was said then and what has been revealed since. In the absence of definitive physical evidence, the case ultimately comes down to who you believe and which version of events makes the most sense given what we know about the people involved and the circumstances of that night. The broader cultural moment wherein has changed how this case is viewed. In 1981, when a famous actor said his wife accidentally drowned, most people accepted that explanation and moved on. The idea of questioning a powerful Hollywood star, of suggesting that he might be responsible for his wife's death, was not something most people were comfortable with. But we live in a different time now. We've learned that fame and success don't preclude someone from being capable of violence. We've learned that initial stories aren't always true, and that powerful people often get away with things precisely because of their power and status. The re-examination of Natalie Wood's death is part of a larger cultural reckoning, a willingness to go back and look again at cases where justice might not have been served, where the truth might have been obscured by celebrity and influence. The tragedy extends beyond Natalie herself to everyone whose life was forever altered that night. Her children grew up without a mother, robbed of her presence at graduations, weddings, and all the moments that make up a life. Her sister Lana was estranged from her nieces and spent decades carrying the burden of questions that couldn't be answered. The film Brainstorm, which Natalie was working on when she died, had to be completed using special effects and stand-ins, becoming a haunting testament to a career cut short. Director Douglas Trumbull said that completing the film was one of the most difficult things he ever did, knowing that Natalie would never see the finished product. The movie, which was supposed to be a comeback vehicle for Natalie, instead became a memorial to what might have been. There are theories that have emerged over the years that go beyond the immediate question of what happened on the yacht. Some have suggested that there was a cover-up at the highest levels, that powerful people in Hollywood and law enforcement worked together to protect Wagner from scrutiny. While these conspiracy theories are difficult to prove, they reflect a deep skepticism about the original investigation and a belief that justice was not served. The rapid closure of the case, the acceptance of Wagner's account without rigorous interrogation, and the delays in reopening the investigation despite persistent questions all contribute to a sense that the system failed Natalie Wood. Whether through incompetence, corruption, or simply a reluctance to challenge a beloved Hollywood figure, the truth was not fully pursued in 1981, and 40 years later, we're still trying to unravel what really happened. The role of alcohol in this tragedy cannot be overstated. By all accounts, everyone on the yacht that night had been drinking heavily. Wagner, Walken, and Natalie had consumed wine at dinner and continued drinking on the boat. Davern has admitted he was drinking as well. Alcohol impairs judgment, increases aggression, and affects memory. The fact that all the witnesses were intoxicated makes their testimony less reliable and also raises questions about decisions that were made that night. If Wagner was drunk when Natalie disappeared, his delayed response might be explained by impaired judgment and confusion rather than by malicious intent. But it doesn't excuse the decisions that were made, particularly the choice to wait before calling for help. Even a drunk person understands that if someone falls off a boat in the middle of the night, you search for them immediately. The delay suggests something else was going on, perhaps panic, perhaps a cover-up, perhaps a misguided belief that Natalie would embarrass herself and come back on her own. The medical examiner who conducted the original autopsy, Thomas Noguchi, became known as the coroner to the stars for his high-profile cases. He performed autopsies on Marilyn Monroe, Robert F. Kennedy, and many other celebrities. His ruling of accidental drowning in Natalie's case was accepted without much question at the time, but years later, other medical examiners who reviewed his findings raised concerns. They questioned whether he had adequately considered the suspicious bruising, whether he had been influenced by Wagner's status and the pressure to close the case quickly, and whether his findings truly supported an accidental drowning conclusion. In 2012, after the case was reopened, the coroner's office revisited Noguchi's findings and made the significant change to the death certificate, acknowledging that there were unexplained factors that Noguchi had not adequately addressed. The failure to find Natalie's body for nearly 10 hours raises additional questions. She was wearing a bright red down jacket, which should have been relatively easy to spot once the sun came up and search efforts intensified. The fact that she was found relatively close to where the yacht was anchored suggests that she hadn't drifted far, which is consistent with the timeline that has been established. But it also means that if the search had begun immediately, she almost certainly would have been found much sooner, possibly while she was still alive. The guilt that Captain Davern carries is rooted in this realization, that his delay, his willingness to go along with Wagner's decision to wait before searching, may have cost Natalie her life. If he had insisted on immediately turning on lights and calling the Coast Guard, the outcome might have been entirely different. As we approach the case in its fifth decade without resolution, the question becomes, will there ever be justice for Natalie Wood? Wagner is now 95 years old, and even if charges were filed, the likelihood of a trial and conviction at his age is minimal. Some argue that this is exactly what he has counted on, that by delaying and refusing to cooperate, he has successfully run out the clock on any potential legal consequences. Others believe that public acknowledgement of the truth is itself a form of justice, that even without criminal charges, the court of public opinion has rendered its verdict. The case has become a cautionary tale about power, celebrity, and the ways that the truth can be obscured when the right people want it to be. It's a reminder that justice delayed is often justice denied, and that families left without answers suffer a unique kind of torment that never truly heals. The final chapter of this story has yet to be written. The investigation technically remains open, though it's unclear what, if any, active steps are being taken to advance it. Wagner continues to maintain his innocence through his attorneys and has not wavered from his original account despite the contradictions and new evidence that have emerged. The case has inspired books, documentaries, television specials, and countless articles, each attempting to piece together the puzzle of what happened on the Splendour that November night. The mystery has become a part of Hollywood lore, referenced in popular culture and discussed on true crime podcasts. But for those who knew and loved Natalie Wood, it's not an entertainment mystery to be solved. It's a real person who died before her time, children who lost their mother, and a family that has never received the full truth about what happened to their daughter and sister. If you could speak to Robert Wagner today and ask him one question, knowing that he would have to answer truthfully, what would you ask? Would it be, what really happened that night? Would it be, did you push her? Or would it be, why didn't you try to save her? The questions that remain are as deep and dark as the water that claimed Natalie Wood's life. And until Robert Wagner breaks his silence and tells the complete, unvarnished truth about the events of November 29, 1981, Natalie Wood's death will remain one of Hollywood's most haunting unsolved mysteries. The truth, like Natalie's body, is out there somewhere, waiting to surface. And the people who know what really happened carry that truth with them every day, a burden that grows heavier with each passing year. Justice may be delayed, but the demand for truth never expires. Natalie Wood deserves answers. Her family deserves answers. And 40 years later, we're still waiting for someone to have the courage to finally tell the whole truth.